10 years ago, I put out the first video in a series that I called A Jack of All Trades, where I talked about my top 15 favorite video games. All the games I talked about were games I loved then, and games that I still love now. But after 10 years, your opinions are bound to change. Newer games can lose their luster, older games can become more appreciated, and some can just withstand the test of time. I did a top 15 because I've been playing video games for a long time. And when you've been playing video games as long as I have, it's hard to look through the mental Rolodex of all the games that you like and rank them in a certain order. That was true then, and it's even more true now. And because 10 years passed since I initially did this, naturally, I ended up playing a lot more games in that time frame. So this time, I'm going to up it from my top 15 to my top 20 favorite games of all time. Gonna get a small spoiler out of the way, but if you've been around my channel long enough to remember what my number one pick was the first time I did this, that hasn't changed. Everything else, though, has gone through a pretty major shakeup. Just like before, I'm going to be setting a self-imposed rule. Since a lot of these entries are not standalones, I'm going to be keeping it to one franchise per entry. Otherwise, the list would probably be dominated by only a few of them. If it comes up naturally, I'll still talk about the other entries in each series, but only one per franchise will actually be making the ranking. For example, if I talk about Kingdom Hearts 2, you won't see any other Kingdom Hearts games on the list, but I'll still give my thoughts on the series as a whole. So the main focus is going to be ranking, but there's going to be a little bit of retrospective too. My criteria for how these games are ranked isn't 100% airtight, but a lot of it is going to just come down to how much I generally enjoyed it. How much I enjoyed the gameplay, how much I enjoyed the aesthetics, and if it's story focused, how much did I enjoy the story. And I really want to emphasize these are the games that I personally enjoy first, and games that are objectively good second. There are some games, even within the same franchises that I talk about, that are probably objectively better than the ones that I have on this list. But this is about the games that meant the most to me, and the ones that I had the most fun playing. And don't mistake me, while some of these will be higher or lower than others on the list, regardless of their placement, I still love each and every game that's on this list. So with that, let's get right into number 20 with Catherine. Catherine! Before I elaborate, I want to preface that I'm talking about the original, not the full body version. Anyway, if you watch my original countdown, this might come as a surprise because in the original list, Catherine was number 3. And that's a pretty big drop. That's not to say I stopped liking the game. In fact, to start off strong, one of my favorite parts about the game is how realistic the characters felt.
What am I gonna do? I didn't mean for any of this to happen.
If you're gonna whine, you shouldn't have done it, dumbass.
Vincent's friend circle feels uncomfortably familiar. I've known people like them. I've known people who've gone through the same kind of relationship problems, the same avoidances, the same emotional messiness.
Hey, don't be so rough on the guy. One day we'll all be old farts like him.
Not all of us.
It's got a strong style and a solid aesthetic. So, why the drop? Well, a big part of it changed after replaying the full body version, which introduced new endings for both Catherines, and adding a third Catherine, Rin.
Sometimes I don't even have the energy for that. These things make me happy just by looking. They're my treasures.
And don't get me wrong, I liked Rin. She's a precious cinnamon bun who must be protected at all costs, but the juxtaposition of her bubbly, almost too pure for this world demeanor up against the grounded, uncomfortable realism of the rest of the cast ends up highlighting just how awful everyone else in the game is in a way I haven't been able to unsee since then. And I'm not just talking about Vincent. I remember when I was playing this game in high school and I was siding with Kay Catherine because, yeah, she yelled at Vincent a lot, but she was also frustrated. She's trying to get her boyfriend to quit drinking and get his life together. That made sense to me at the time. But replaying it years later with more perspective, I clocked a few things that I kind of brushed over the last time I played it, like, wait, what do you mean you faked a pregnancy? I'm being critical here because Catherine has a genuinely engaging story and compelling characters. But a quick sidebar in talking about the characters is one thing I can't leave unsaid is how beautifully voice acted they are. These are some of the best voice talent in the industry. Troy Baker, Laura Bailey, Travis Willingham, Aaron Fitzgerald, Liam O'Brien, everyone brings out their A game. One of my favorite moments is when the two Catherines are fighting each other and one of them gets stabbed and Michelle Ruff just cracks.
Catherine, look at me. Calm down. Calm down!
I don't know what was going on in the booth that day, but I still get chills seeing it. But back on the aesthetics, the Stray Sheep bar has this cozy lived-in feeling. Some of my favorite parts of the game were just walking around and talking with the random patrons and getting pulled into their conversations. It really sells the idea that you're part of this messy little social ecosystem. I also like that this story doesn't really seem to pick a side to which kind of relationship is better. It's more of what choice is better for you. One leads more towards commitment and security, another is more geared towards passion and freedom, or maybe you could just stay single and work on yourself. But in all three scenarios, you can still end up happy. It does punish you if you can't be decisive though. Easily the two worst endings in the game are the ones where Vincent only seems to have one foot in the door one way or the other, which ends up with him either getting rejected or dying or both. And now with all that out of the way, we can finally talk about the gameplay. It's alright. Number 19, Clair Obscur, Expedition 33. I know a lot of people like this game, but I put it a bit lower on the list due to the fact that at the time of me writing this, it's only been out for about a year, so it's a little too soon to see if this holds up to the test of time. Maybe in another 10 years when I do a top 30 that may change, but as it stands, it's still a really good game. Turn-based combat RPGs have always been kinda hit and miss with me. In fact, there's only one other game on this list that actually has it, but it's inventive enough to keep the game fun. Each character has different gimmicks that are easy to follow and don't feel cumbersome, and it is super satisfying when you manage to successfully block an enemy combo or a gradient attack. But of course, as is the case with most RPGs, the game is really carried by its story. The first two acts seem like a standard hero's journey. They set up the big bad guy, establish the Gamage without ever fully explaining what it is, and you follow a lot of generic fantasy RPG story beats as you work toward what you think is going to be the big villain, the Paintress.
You will not take this canvas from me.
This is what we created the expeditions for.
Tomorrow comes.
But then, in Act 2, you kill the Paintress, and then you go home. And that's when the whole story turns on its head. Everything you thought you knew about the established world suddenly gets thrown out the window and Act 3 begins. The story transforms from just another hero quest to a much more personal story. A story about a family so overwhelmed with grief they lose themselves in a world that they created. Exploring grief is going to be a pretty reoccurring theme in a lot of these games, and while I do think there are other games that explore it better, I also think this one has one of the better follow-throughs. There's a final decision that you as the player have to make at the end, and it's not an easy choice. It's a choice between living a comforting lie while letting yourself slowly wither away in a world that protects you from pain, or facing reality, saying goodbye, and letting yourself feel the emotions that you've been avoiding for years or possibly even decades, with the hope that you might get the closure you need. If you haven't played it yet, check it out. It's good to see that even in the current day and age, there's still original large-scale games that don't need to rely on familiar IPs or whatever gameplay mechanics that are popular at the time, and instead just stand on the strength of their own ideas. Number 18, Super Mario Galaxy. I think everyone has their Mario game that they love that just clicks with them the way the others don't. I think this one's mine. Super Mario 64 was one of the first games I ever played growing up. Super Mario Sunshine ironed out a lot of the jankiness in the controls that the 64 had due to technical limitations. But to me, Galaxy managed to take everything that I loved about both of them and built on it. The word I keep coming back to when describing this game is cozy. This is a very cozy game. On top of it just being fun, having better controls, and the scale being massive, especially for the time, there's just something so pleasant about this game. I think a lot of that has to do with the soundtrack. I remember some days I would just put this game on and sit in the observatory letting the music play while I did some work around the house. And I think the Gusty Garden Galaxy is probably one of the best songs to come out of any Mario, hell, probably any Nintendo game. While Mario games have never been especially strong in their story department outside of their RPGs, I do like that this one does a little more experimenting. I didn't really think about this until recently, but with Bowser being able to effectively create and destroy entire planets, the stakes are higher than they've ever been in any 3D Mario game. I also like that they explore some of the side characters. Character. Rosalina's backstory is surprisingly kind of heartbreaking. It adds this quiet, melancholy undertone that you wouldn't usually associate with Mario. At the time of me writing this, they just dropped the trailer for the Super Mario Galaxy movie, and I'm wondering if they're gonna actually use any of it. Looking back, I think Galaxy hit me at the exact right time. It's comforting without being boring, it's ambitious without being overwhelming, and that balance is why it stuck with me even after coming out.
Wait, it came out how long ago?
Number 17, Mirror's Edge. Mirror's Edge has a lot of things going for it that really shouldn't work on paper. A high-speed, first-person, parkour platformer developed by EA. If you described this to somebody else, this would sound like a game that was dead on arrival. But honestly, I've never seen another game like this. It's not as grandiose as some of the other games on this list, but there's this weird, almost elegant feel to it, both in how it's stylized and in the gameplay. The flow you enter when sprinting, wall running, vaulting, and rolling become less about pressing buttons and more about entering a rhythm. The game definitely stands out visually because of its clean, almost sterile art direction. All bright whites and harsh primary colors, giving the world a very dreamlike quality that feels both futuristic but also kind of fragile. When I first played it, I was in high school, and before doing this I hadn't replayed it that much, but when I was replaying it, I was surprised about how much I actually remembered. I remember Faith, I remember the rebellion, her sister, the city. I have yet to play the sequel as of me writing this now, but people I know that have do tell me they dive a bit more into the intricacies of the world's politics of the story, so maybe I'll check it out soon and see where it stacks up to the first one. But in a way, I'm still okay with Mirror's Edge standing out on its own, because less really is more here, and because it left me wanting more, Mirror's Edge still holds up after all these years. Number 16 is Katamari Forever. So not a lot of these games are on here primarily for their gameplay, but this is definitely one of those games. I mean, I could talk about the story, but honestly, it doesn't matter. It's lighthearted, it's wacky, and it's got a weirdness that could only really come from Japan. The concept is simple. You roll a bunch of stuff up into a ball, then launch them into space where they turn into stars. I touched on this a bit earlier, but ease of gameplay paired with an easy listening soundtrack goes a long way with me. Katamari Damacy was a great foundation, but every game that came after kept finding small ways to build on that idea. Katamari Forever is kind of a master collection of those ideas. There's a camping level where you have to roll a giant campfire around, so you're constantly rolling things up to keep the flame from going out. There's a snow level where you're building a massive snowball to create a giant snowman. And then there's probably my favorite one, the level where you roll up so much stuff and get the ball so big that you eventually start rolling up planets, stars, and even black holes just to wake up the king. It's the little things in this game both figuratively and literally. The music in these games kind of do for me what the music in Minecraft does for a lot of people. It's the kind of soundtrack that you can zone out to, but also focus on while it plays. When I was in college, I'd usually have this music on while I studied. And hell, I even listened to a lot of this music while I was editing this exact video. Not much else to say besides, we love Katamari. I mean, not, you know what I mean. Number 15 is Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. Listen, I'm probably on the spectrum to some degree, so a Sonic game being on here really shouldn't surprise anybody. The 3D Sonic games have ranged from bad to weird to really bad. But I think this game is almost universally considered the best of the bunch, and for good reason. Coming right off the heels of the success for the first Sonic Adventure, Battle manages to take the 3 different methods of gameplay that worked the best in the first one and refine them to their best qualities. Each one may have their own hang-ups, but I'd say that's more due to the limitations of what their style offers rather than a mark against the design. If you don't like platformer adjacent scavenger hunt style levels, for example, you're probably not going to like playing as Knuckles or Rouge. Of course, in talking about the gameplay, I can't not mention the Chao Gardens. I've sunk in so many hours into that part of the game in particular, it's not even funny. There were some points where I would just focus on getting power bars that were all one singular color, and then super juicing the stat of one of the Chows I was raising. Then there's the races, the fights, unlocking the different gardens, and that's just one part of the game. Another thing I can't leave unsaid is the character of Shadow. Shadow the Hedgehog has had an interesting relationship over the years, both with the Sonic fandom and with the internet in general.
I found you, Faker. Faker? I think you're the fake hedgehog around here.
When he was first introduced, he was made to be this darker, cooler foil to Sonic. And for a while, it worked. I didn't know a single kid that played these games growing up that didn't think he was cool to some degree, with his dark colors, tragic backstory, brooding attitude. But this game actually does commit to the bit and gives him a real arc, and some surprisingly heavy themes about grief, identity, and purpose. But as time went on, people started poking fun at his edginess, especially when his spin-off game came out, while they let him swear while being voiced by his 4Kids actor of all people.
Where's that damn fourth Chaos Emerald?
Nowadays, I think they lean more into the edgelord persona, with a bit of an ironic edge, and as a result, people seem to love him again. It probably helps that his two counterparts, Rouge and Omega, do add some much-needed levity. Nowadays, it's hard to imagine a Sonic story featuring Shadow without his squad. Looking at you, Paramount! I'm getting off topic though, I haven't even brought up my favorite part of this game, the music. This entire soundtrack goes harder than it has any right to. From Knuckles' rap tracks to Rouge's central jazz, Shadow's grunge theme, City Escape, I'm the Eggman, Live and Learn, there's literally no other way to describe this soundtrack besides iconic. This game was the textbook definition of product of its times for the early 2000s, and it's not the least bit sorry about it, and that kinda makes me respect it more. Number 14 is Psychonauts 2. Before I talk about this one, it's important to talk about this game's development history. The original Psychonauts was a timeless classic. It was fun, weird, and it had enough creativity to where a sequel felt like a no-brainer. But for a long time, that sequel just wasn't going to happen. Tim Schafer ended up focusing on other projects, and for a while, it felt like Psychonauts was just going to be one of those great one-off cult classics. Years later, though, both Schafer and Double Fine came back with a series of Kickstarter projects. The first one, Broken Age, started strong, but the second half didn't really live up to the first. Because of that, confidence started to dip, and when Psychonauts 2 was announced as another crowdfunded project, there was a real concern that it might not stick the landing. So needless to say, Psychonauts 2 had a lot to live up to. But not only was it better than the first one, but Psychonauts 2 was one of the best games to come out that entire year. And yes, I am one of those people who are bitter that it didn't get Game of the Year that year. It took everything about the first game that made it work and built on it. I liked the first game, but it definitely had its issues. There was a massive difficulty spike halfway through the first game, and the grinding to actually get to where I needed to be for the Milkman level killed my momentum for years. Psychonauts 2, meanwhile, had me glued from start to finish. They kept the core mechanics of the first game, but they added just enough new spins to make it feel like it's standing apart as its own thing rather than trying to retread on old territory, including a cute reference to Invader Zim. The level design ranges from fun to demented, and sometimes it's a combination of the two. And the story was way more engaging than the first. I thought the first game's story was fun too, but this one introduced a legitimate mystery over the course of the story, and I didn't always know where it was gonna go. This could have so easily been a half-baked sequel that coasted on nostalgia, and there is a little bit of that, but here the nostalgia actually serves the plot because of how closely tied it is to the first game, rather than just making you say, hey, remember this part? It may have taken 16 years for this game to come out, but this is one sequel that was absolutely worth the wait. Ow! Number 13, Halo Reach. Say what you want about the Halo franchise as a whole, but the Bungie era of Halo was easily Halo at its best, each game just getting progressively better and better. Mostly. And not only do I think Halo Reach was the best of them, but it's also one of those games that just gets better and better the more I replay it. As a kid, I had a lot of fun playing it online with the boys. I don't even know how many hours I sank into that game before, and I wouldn't dare try to get back on my old Hotmail account to see for myself. I just know I played it online a lot. But playing it again as an adult years later on the Master Chief Collection on Steam, I've come to appreciate the maturity of the campaign. I've always been a sucker for doomed prequels where in order for everything to happen in the original game, everything here has to go wrong. And you'd think that would kill the tension as we know how it ends. But Reach actually makes it work because it shifts focus. The characters know that this is a losing battle, and instead of fighting to win the war, you're fighting to buy everyone else time. Noble Team doesn't have a shiny Spartan hero like Master Chief. They're just soldiers doing their best to hold the line as the situation just gets progressively worse and worse. And it works because everything they do does still matter. As everything does fall apart, they succeed in one crucial goal. They manage to ensure that Cortana escapes Reach, setting the events of the original trilogy into motion.
This is the Pillar of Autumn. We're away. The package is with us.
The part of the game that everyone talks about, though, is the last mission, and for good reason. It's one of the best final levels in any shooting game ever, because it represents everything that the game was up to that point. A long, uphill battle struggling against the inevitable. I have yet to play any of the Halo games that came after this one, but people I know that have tell me that it never quite recaptured the magic that Bungie had before leaving Microsoft. And while it's sad to see Bungie leave, it's nice to know that their last one was one of their best. Number 12, Portal 2. Oh Valve, my middle school sweetheart. I know some people like to say Portal 1 is better than Portal 2. I disagree. I think people liked Portal because of how it ended, and 2 basically took the energy of that ending and carried it throughout the entire game. I feel like this is a weird thing to talk about in a game, but the strongest thing this game has going for it is its personality.
Those of you who volunteered to be injected with praying mantis DNA, I've got some good news and some bad news. Bad news is we're postponing those tests indefinitely. Good news is we've got a much better test for you. Fighting an army of mantis men. Pick up a rifle and follow the yellow line. You'll know when the test starts.
There is so much charm throughout this game between Wheatley, GLaDOS, Cave Johnson, the corrupted cores. Even that little guide voice at the beginning still has such a strong presence, even though I think he only has like 5 lines in the game.
This next test applies the principles of momentum to movement through portals. If the laws of physics no longer apply in the future, God help you.
And then of course there's the gameplay. Everything that was great about the first game is present in this one. Unlike the first game though, it's a lot more hands-off on how it teaches you how to do certain things. Part of that is that it does seem to count on the fact that you played the first game, but instead it relies on its environment to teach you without ever outright telling you how to do something. Yeah, Wheatley or GLaDOS will tell you to go from point A to point B, but the actual process of how to get there is mostly left to your own devices. But where it really shines is their puzzle and level designs. This time it's not just turrets and bouncing beams. But this time they have things like gravity lifts, light bridges, and there's different flavors of goop that either help you jump higher, go faster, or make portal surfaces. And it leads to a brilliant final boss battle. If you somehow haven't played it, I won't ruin it, but it's both really clever and really funny. I know people like to poke fun at the fact that Valve seems to have a phobia when it comes to putting a third installment in any of their games, but I think this is just one of their games that didn't need a follow-up. It was the perfect natural conclusion of the story. It was plenty of fun, we got some enjoyable lore, and we even got a co-op campaign that puts a nice little bow on top. This was a sequel that was really thinking with portals. See what I did there? Number 11, Batman Arkham City. Before Batman Arkham Asylum came out, the bar for comic book games wasn't exactly high. There was some fun ones before this, sure, but superhero games were more like tie-in games to movies or shows rather than actual standalone projects. But when the trailer first came out, it definitely got my attention. The level designs were beautifully gothic, the gameplay was fast-paced but not without its depth. But the biggest selling items was Kevin Conroy coming back to voice Batman, Mark Hamill as the Joker, and they even got the late Arlene Sorkin to come back and play Harley one last time. This was a game for people who grew up loving the 90s Batman animated series, and I was definitely in that crowd. I definitely liked it when it came out, but there were a few parts that kept me from loving it. But Arkham City pretty much fixed any issue that I did have. For one, I like that in Arkham City it doesn't always feel like you're relying as much on detective vision, which was a small problem I had with the first game because most of the time you're using it while you're indoors, so you couldn't really enjoy the level design because you were looking at everything through an X-ray lens. City let me really appreciate the level design and the atmosphere, and I also like that a lot of it takes place more outdoors, so you really get to enjoy this little chunk of Gotham City. But the biggest thing it has going for it is the Rogues Gallery of villains.
Nothing wrong with you. Nice of you to say, but you of all people should know there's plenty wrong with me.
The villains they got in Arkham Asylum were good too, but there was only a few of them. But here, I think there's almost 3 times as many.
Heads or tails, kitty cat.
And they weren't sequestered into just being little Easter eggs or references like in Asylum. You don't see hints of Mr. Freeze, the Penguin, or Two-Face. You actually see Mr. Freeze, the Penguin, and Two-Face. They're center focal points of the game. One of the other big issues I had with Arkham Asylum was the boss battles. Not to say they were bad, but a few of them felt out of place. Poison Ivy's fight felt like something out of PlanetSide. Scarecrow's felt less like a boss battle and more like a Limbo-style platformer. And probably the most offensive was the final battle with the Joker. But in Arkham City, there's not only more appropriate boss battles, but they're inventive. In the Mr. Freeze boss battle, his suit keeps adapting to your attacks so you can never attack him the same way twice. There's a trippy boss battle with Ra's al Ghul in the Demon Trial. And I won't give away who the final boss is, but it's a good twist final boss that paves the way for a beautiful proper finale. The games that followed were okay, but if this was where the Arkham story would have ended otherwise, I would have been satisfied. I may have liked Arkham Asylum, but if Arkham Asylum revolutionized how comic book games were being made, Arkham City definitely perfected it. Number 10 is Silent Hill 2. This is one of those games that makes it onto a lot of people's lists, and I can see why. This game is dripping with spooky atmosphere, both literally and figuratively. Fog chokes the streets, rust bleeds through the walls, and everything feels damp, decayed, and wrong in a way that goes well beyond run-of-the-mill horror. I mentioned in an earlier entry that a lot of these games explore the concept of grief, but I think this is the first of maybe two on here that are the most direct about it. You play as James Sutherland, who receives a letter from his wife telling him to go to a place called Silent Hill, even though we learn right at the start that she's been dead for years. Silent Hill 2 isn't terribly scary in its monsters or jump scares, but it does have a critical component that's important for a psychological horror like this, that being intimacy. The game slowly begins to unravel who James is and why he came here in the first place. The horror doesn't come from sudden scares, but the creeping realization of what's actually happening. As you explore the town, you start to encounter different manifestations of different facets of James's psyche, from the unsettling mannequins to the iconic Pyramid Head. Not just as monsters to fight, but also as reflections of the guilt and the grief that James has been trying to bury. And when you find out exactly what happened near the end, it makes the ending that much stronger. Because when you're dealing with the horrors of grief and psychological trauma, the final boss is always you. Number 9, Final Fantasy IV. This is another case that's sort of akin to Mario Galaxy in talking about certain parts of the series that just grab you the way others don't, even if there's some other parts that are objectively better. When people bring up discussions about their favorite Final Fantasies, 4 is not typically one that gets talked about a lot. Which is honestly kind of a shame, because a lot of the elements that I love about Final Fantasy are because of this game. And I'm not just talking about the monsters, MacGuffins, and overall aesthetics, but also the character arcs, the emotional weight, and the overall clear sense of growth. While the moments in 4 aren't quite as iconic as something like, say, Cloud coming to terms with who he really is, or Vivi's journey to self-acceptance, but they're still noteworthy because of how ahead of their time they were. And at the heart of it all is the main character himself. Cecil Harvey starts off as a corrupted knight. He knows what he's doing is wrong, but is too scared to disobey orders, and is only able to because of a literal divine intervention. When he's separated from his friend and fellow knight Kane Highwind, it sets him on a path of redemption, overcoming trials to become a paladin, uncovering the truth behind the kingdom he served, and making it his mission to set things right. And of course, we get to see him do it alongside a colorful cast of ragtag party members that would later go on to become a staple in Final Fantasy. In a lot of ways, it feels like a bridge between Western fantasy and what would later become the more distinct Final Fantasy aesthetic. You still have airships, crystals, and magical technology, but it hasn't fully leaned into the surreal or sci-fi elements yet like we'd go on to see in later games. And because of that, the story feels grounded. Cecil's arc works not just as a JRPG storyline, but also as a classic fantasy redemption tale. Strip away the user interface and the turn-based combat, and it could almost work just as well as a traditional fantasy novel. And I think that blend of Western fantasy tropes with the emerging Final Fantasy identity is why this game still resonates with me so strongly. Also, because I'm bad at writing transitions, I don't really know how to jump into this topic smoothly. But I also want to talk about the cast ensemble's designs, because they look great. Kane's design is almost synonymous with the archetype for Dragoons, so much so that it becomes the standard in Final Fantasy XIV. Cecil's design is iconic both as his Dark Knight and as his Paladin. Rydia is still probably my favorite summoner, and Golbez might be one of the coolest Final Fantasy villain designs. In a way, I guess you could say this one walks so later Final Fantasies could run. Because at its core, Final Fantasy IV is a story about confronting who you are, accepting the weight of your mistakes, and choosing to be better anyway. And for a genre that's so well known to be about saving the world, they show that sometimes the most powerful first step is learning how to save yourself. While later entries would go on to refine and even arguably surpass those initial ideas, being pretentious, I like to say that Final Fantasy IV was the one that proved Final Fantasy could be more than just an adventure. It could be a story that stays with you. number 8, Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess. I would once again like to remind everyone, this is my personal enjoyment list, not the ones that I think are objectively better. Now that we got that out of the way, I was no stranger to Zelda before this one came out. I didn't play too many of the 2D games, but I played the shit out of Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and Wind Waker. But Twilight Princess came out at a time where mainstream games collectively started growing up. Shooting games like Gears of War and Call of Duty were on the rise, brown and gray palettes were pretty much everywhere, and we started getting more into stories about war, loss, grief, moral ambiguity. There was kind of this unspoken rule at this point that if a game wanted to be taken seriously, it had to shed anything that looked bright or cartoony. This obviously falls apart when you remember that Majora's Mask tackled some of the darkest themes to ever be showcased in a Nintendo game while still keeping their bright and colorful appearance. But where Majora's Mask did it darker, Twilight Princess did it bigger. And I don't just mean on a physical scale, although yeah, this did have the biggest world map until Breath of the Wild came out, but I also mean on an emotional scale. This game really leans into its melancholic atmosphere. Hell, this is the first line of dialogue in the game. That line tells you exactly what you're in for. It sets the bittersweet tone you feel throughout every part of the game. The Twilight aesthetic in particular does a lot of heavy lifting on the overall dreariness. This version of Hyrule feels more worn down compared to the others, more uneasy, like there's something wrong but you can't quite put your finger on what. The colors are more muted, the environments feel colder, even the familiar locations carry this sense of dread and decay. But at the same time, there's also sort of a glow to it. It can feel threatening, but it can also feel inviting. The closest thing I think I can compare it to is when you first become an adult in Ocarina of Time. When you exit the Temple of Time and into Castle Town and you see that it's dark, there's monsters everywhere, and everyone we saw before is now gone. That weird sense of isolation where you don't know anyone and you don't know what happened to the people you do know. Imagine that feeling constantly throughout the game. That feeling where it's a world that you felt like you always knew, but the only thing that you really knew is how little you knew about it. Sorry, I think I had a stroke there for a second. Anyway, I realize I'm making it sound like this game is miserable and unpleasant, but it really isn't. There's a few reasons that this works instead of collapsing under the weight of its own sadness, the biggest of which is probably because of your companion. Midna just might be the best Zelda companion of all time. From the moment we first meet her, she's completely different from the likes of, say, Navi or Tattle. She's manipulative, she's deceitful, and she makes it no secret that she just sees you as a tool for her to use. But over time, the dynamic with her slowly begins to change, and the connection goes from being a means to an end to an emotional anchor of the game. Eventually, Midna stops being just a guide stand-in and starts becoming a real character with real goals and real stakes. All of which we see when we discover who she really is and what she lost. And watching her go from self-preservation to genuinely caring for Link and Zelda is one of the strongest character arcs in the entire series. What makes Midna work so well is that she perfectly mirrors the tone of the game. The further you go beneath this exterior of cold and hurt, the more you start to feel the warmth underneath it all. And as she opens up to it, so does the game. And in that, I'm gonna get a little real for a second. When this game came out, I was going through a lot in my real life. Moving to a new town, transferring schools, being stuck in the middle of a messy divorce between parents. I don't want to get all depressed on you guys in the middle of my goofy video game list. I know a lot of people go through these, but I bring this up because this was right before the internet as we knew it really started to blow up. So I didn't really have a lot of old friends I could keep in contact with, and I also didn't have that many outlets. So this was one of my only real escapes. And in a way, I think that's why the loneliness of this game resonated with me, because it mirrored the way I felt when I was playing it. I was exploring a world that felt familiar, but it also felt distant, trying to help people who couldn't really help me back. Moving forward mostly on my own, but with only a few people who actually understood what I was going through. In a weird way, I liked the lonely feeling of Twilight Princess because it made me feel less alone. Because of this, the ending hits pretty hard. Saying goodbye to Midna at the end isn't treated like a celebration. It's treated like an understanding that sometimes saving the world means giving up the one person who understood you. When Midna destroys the mirror, it isn't framed like a victory, just a necessary loss. That's why this game stays with me. Not just because it's darker or bigger, but because it understands loneliness, connection, and letting go. And it actually has the courage to follow through on these ideas. I didn't love Twilight Princess in spite of its loneliness. I loved it because it understood mine. Number 7, BioShock. So this might surprise the people who actually watched my original, because the BioShock franchise in my last top 15 was actually at number 5. And even more so, it wasn't the original BioShock, it was BioShock Infinite. So let's break it down a little. When I first played these games, I was a lot more interested in BioShock Infinite's storytelling, dramatic twists, and characters delving into long monologues about freedom and control. But I think one of the things I've come to appreciate about the original BioShock is that a lot of its story is told in its environment. When you first see Rapture, you don't see it as the technical marvel that it was supposed to be. You just see a world that's already fallen apart long before you actually got there. The story never actually stops to explain what all went wrong. You just piece it together through things like propaganda posters, broken rooms, audio logs, and the quiet horror starts to set in as you keep going and realize that this place was built on an idea that was ultimately never going to work. A city founded on radical individualism where the belief is that the great shouldn't be constrained by the small eventually collapses under its own weight. And what makes it work in a way that it didn't work as well for the other games is that the game doesn't really lecture you about it. It just lets you live inside the consequences. It's a little bit mean-spirited in its delivery, but it's also done confidently. It lets you experience the rot firsthand and then draw your own conclusions rather than spelling them out. But in talking about BioShock's storytelling, I can't gloss over the twist. If by some chance you haven't been spoiled to it yet, I won't give it away, but this is one of the best twists I've seen in gaming history, like top 3 easy. When I first heard it, it made me question literally everything about this game after that. Who is this guy I'm playing as? What is his connection to Atlas? And what was my actual role in all this? It reinforces the game's core theme about control, agency, and choice in a way that can only be done in a video game format. The game doesn't just explore those themes, it makes you feel what it's like to lose them. It makes you play along and asks you whether or not you really had a choice at all. And that's the level of storytelling that few other games have been able to replicate, including other BioShock games. Number 6 is Kingdom Hearts 2. If you watch some of my earlier videos, then you probably know that I have a
Don't tell me there's more!
complicated history with these games. Like, don't get me wrong, I do love the Kingdom Hearts games. Or most of them. Or some of them. 2 of them. In talking about the storyline of Kingdom Hearts, there seems to be 2 camps. People who believe it should have ended at 2, or wanted to keep the story going on forever. I can safely say I'm not in the latter. Kingdom Hearts 2 to me felt like the real conclusion of the story. Sora completes his journey, he's reunited with Riku and Kairi back on the island, the worlds are saved, the villains are destroyed. If you removed the post-credit teases, I would have fully believed that this was the final chapter. One of the things I respect the most about this game is that it's willing to take some major risks. The first and probably the biggest one being that it doesn't start you with playing Sora right away.
Another dream about him.
I didn't know how to feel about playing as Roxas the first time I played this game. Because at the time, I was waiting for this game for years, and now here I am playing some guy I've never heard of. But the Twilight Town level kinda wormed its way into my heart. With its townfolks, the routines, the sunsets, not to mention the music. Kingdom Hearts always had some of the best soundtracks in gaming, and the Twilight Town theme is probably one of their best. Something about the slow calmness of it evokes this sense of nostalgia even when hearing it for the first time, and that's not an easy feat. And because of that, it gives this level this melancholy undertone. That feeling like you're about to lose something but you're not sure what. And that's another risk it takes. Unlike the other games, Kingdom Hearts 2 trusts its player base. Despite the name 2, it's actually the 3rd entry in the series. The game that came before this one was Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories, and at the time it was an exclusive on the Game Boy Advance. So there was a real possibility that people wouldn't know what was going on. But whether it's due to better pacing or because there's just not as much stuff to recap in this one, all the recapping that we do get from previous games feel natural and diegetic, not to mention easy to follow. In later games, they would phone in hundreds of lengthy cutscenes just catching people up to the story from between games. Instead, this game slowly drip feeds information instead of massive lore dumps. So when revelations happen and certain characters are revealed, they don't make you think it's a shocking twist, they make you think, oh wait, yeah, that makes sense. I also like that they don't go out of their way to answer every little question that pops up in this game, and it's better for that. It understands that sometimes the mystery is part of the magic. In later games where they would try to answer some of those questions, they would either be met with more questions or just give us answers that would later be retconned anyway. Another thing that this game understands is consequences. By the end of Kingdom Hearts 2, people are actually gone. Organization 13 is destroyed, sacrifices are made, and they're treated with the weight they deserve. The losses really do stick. The story has weight because actions actually matter. And because of that, the ending actually feels impactful, like you see what it was all for.
End of the road. Yep.
Many of these deaths would later go on to be retconned a few years later, but at the time, we thought that this was the end. And even if the story did continue, it wouldn't feel like something's missing without them. I know I haven't been doing this in too many of these games, but I do want to talk about the gameplay a little. Kingdom Hearts 2 took everything that worked about the first game's combat and smoothed it out. The addition of drive forms makes combat feel fun and lets you experiment with the different playstyles and combinations. The triangle commands keep action flowing without slowing it down. It's good about throwing you into situations that just feel fun to play. It was one of the few RPGs where I was actually excited for random encounters. Because whenever one popped up, I would usually either have a new combo or a new limit I wanted to try. That 1000 Heartless battle was nothing short of cathartic. Yes, I know how it's done. Yes, I know it wasn't that hard. But mowing down entire hordes of Heartless and feeling like you constantly have the upper hand despite being surrounded on all sides was satisfying then, and it's satisfying now. And satisfying really is the takeaway word here. Kingdom Hearts 2 felt very satisfying. It kept my intrigue, it challenged my expectations, and tied it all together with a story that left me, well, satisfied.
Guy's a broken record!
I may not have been a fan of the games that would later come out after this, but at the very least I can understand why others do. I mean, how could I blame them for wanting more of this? Number 5 is Shadow of the Colossus. I'm not going to talk about this one for too long because honestly, most of what makes this game special has already been talked about by people who are much more articulate about it than I am. My favorite parts of the game are your favorite parts. The scale, the music, the atmosphere, the gameplay, the twist. This was one of the earliest progenitors of the "Are video games art" debate, and it's hard not to see why. It's not especially flashy, there's very little dialogue, and the gameplay itself isn't super deep, but because of that restraint, it makes everything you do as the player feel heavy both literally and figuratively. Every victory you have after battling a Colossus never actually feels like a victory. If anything, it leaves us as the players thinking, is this really the right thing we're doing? It becomes a gradual decline of morality propagated by every classic video game trope. A fallen loved one, a giant monster that has to be slayed. And the answers in regards to what's right and wrong are never clear-cut. Do you deserve to decide who lives and who dies? If the world didn't ask to be saved, is it still heroism or is it just more destruction? And if it is destruction, does love justify it? It's a hauntingly beautiful game that resonates with me even to this day. There's a reason it's considered one of the best games ever made, and there's a reason it's one of my favorite games of all time. Number 4 is Tales of the Abyss. So this might be another surprise because my last top 15 had this game at number 2. And I want to emphasize that is not at all a failing on this game's part, it's just that I love the next 3 games that much more. Without giving any of the names away, the next 2 games on this list came out after this first one was made. Anyway, onto the game itself. I like that the Tales games have been slowly eking their way into the mainstream, because both aesthetically and mechanically they have things that I like that only this flavor of RPG really offers. I know Tales fans usually pick Symphonia as their favorite, but for me, Abyss was my first love. One of the things it does the strongest is its exploration of growth. I like that it's not afraid to have its main character be unlikable.
Ah, shut up for a second. I don't understand a thing you're saying. Well, say something.
First you tell me to shut up. Now you're telling me to talk.
Luke starts this game off as a self-entitled, self-centered little shit. He constantly complains and constantly berates and belittles his friends and family.
Hold on, you can't do that. If you go back home, who's gonna train me?
Settle down. I'll have one of my men come here until I return to Kimlaska.
But I want you to teach me.
And the game doesn't rush to make him better either, instead leaning on the charm of the supporting cast.
And didn't anyone ever teach you to bow your head in respect when asking someone for a favor?
Don't act like that, Luke. You don't want a war either, do you?
Commander.
Master Luke, please grant us your aid.
Man, do you have any pride?
None so cheap as to be shaken by something as petty as this.
Characters like Tyr, Jade, and Guy are all incredibly endearing and incredibly entertaining. Not to mention well designed.
What?
Guy doesn't like women.
I'd say it looks more like a phobia.
Sorry, it's nothing personal. It's just...
If it helps, you don't have to think of me as a woman. Fine. I'll be sure to keep my distance.
So because of them, we grin and bear him until he goes too far and does something he can't undo. I won't spoil what happens because I really do think this game is worth checking out, but what you need to know is that the game doesn't let Luke or you as the player escape it. While it's technically a twist, it doesn't just treat it like it's a twist. It's also treated as a direct consequences of who Luke is up to that point in the story. And it works as a twist because upon replaying it, you can see a lot of the pieces were already in plain sight. The party doesn't immediately rush to forgive Luke either. In fact, not long after the incident I was talking about earlier happens, almost the entirety of the party leaves Luke behind. Some of them are angry, some of them are disappointed, some don't even know how to feel with him.
Ever since you lost your memory, you're like a completely different person.
It's Master Van's fault, not mine, right, Guy?
Luke, don't make me think even less of you.
And that friction is important because it treats what happened with the weight it deserves. The game constantly asks whether conviction without empathy is any better than ignorance without intent, and it never gives you an easy answer.
Up till now, all I ever paid attention to was myself. And I'm not even sure I saw myself clearly.
Yeah.
I want to change. I have to change.
If you really mean that, then perhaps you can.
But that's not how things are. Even if I tried to make up for it, I'd never be able to. So I'm gonna start with what I can do.
Only after Luke is completely broken by the weight of his own actions does his real arc begin. Redemption isn't handed to Luke just because he's the main character. It's something he has to earn back slowly through active actions and active practices. While the theme of destiny is present, at that point it's not about destiny. It's about holding yourself accountable, about learning empathy, about realizing that wanting to be better doesn't matter if you're not willing to put the work in. Watching Luke rebuild himself piece by piece alongside friends that don't just support him but also challenge him, and defined by villains who reflect what he and the rest of his party could become, feels raw in a way that JRPGs don't normally allow their characters to be. It's one of the strongest redemption arcs that the genre's ever pulled off, and it ties beautifully into the game's themes. It may have lost the number 2 spot, but there's a reason it's still in the top 5. Not much else to say. I love this game. Number 3, Nier Automata. Before I get into this, let's get the jokes out of the way. Yes, Yoko Taro is a weird little gremlin who makes his characters deliberately sexy specifically to give himself Gunnar material. Okay, we got that out of the way, let's move on. So, I didn't play the original Nier when I first heard about it, and when I first saw a trailer for Nier Automata, it felt like a generic anime game that I've seen a few times before, in that you play as a sexy anime girl in a sexy anime maid outfit, in a hack and slash style combat that feels similar to Bayonetta or Metal Gear Rising. And at first, it definitely feels like that. But once you get past the first hour, the whole thing transforms into an existential crisis that I was not even remotely prepared for. The longer I played, the more the game starts asking questions that most games, hell, most art is terrified to touch on. What does it mean to have a purpose if that purpose is a lie? What does identity look like when your memories can be rewritten, deleted, or manufactured?
Yeah?
Thank you for uploading my data to the bunker.
I did that? Sorry, I don't remember. There wasn't a whole lot of bandwidth down there, you know? I probably only had enough time to back up your memories. Mine are only intact up to the point just before we rendezvoused.
And if suffering is inevitable, does meaning come from enduring it or rejecting it entirely?
Everything that lives is designed to end. We are perpetually trapped in a never-ending spiral of life and death. Is this a curse? Or some kind of punishment? I often think about the god who blessed us with this cryptic puzzle. and wonder if we'll ever have the chance to kill him.
The voice acting is some of the best I've heard in years, the music is hauntingly beautiful, but most importantly, it takes advantage of its video game medium. This is the kind of story you wouldn't be able to tell as a movie or a novel without losing something essential. The gameplay messes with us both in our perspective and in our expectations of what a playthrough is supposed to be. The idea that the credits can roll and the story isn't even close to finishing is always a smart narrative trick that I appreciate, and it's one that can only ever be done in video games. But each new playthrough doesn't just add information, it reframes everything you thought you knew from the first one. Characters you initially dismissed gain depth. Enemies that you killed before and didn't think about suddenly become tragic. All tied together with this bleak, nihilistic atmosphere. One of the core things about Automata is its obsession with meaning. Specifically how both man and machine cling to it when the universe refuses to give them any. Every faction in this game is built around some version of that struggle. Androids who believe they're fighting for humanity even though humanity's been gone for hundreds, possibly thousands of years. Machines who mimic religion, family, hierarchy, and philosophy because they don't know what else to do with their existence. None of these beliefs are portrayed as clean or heroic. They're usually messy, contradictory, and sometimes even delusional.
His wondrous grace has become a god.
If a belief gives somebody purpose, comfort, or directions, does it matter whether or not it's true? Another thing they explore is the concept of identity. Characters are defined by roles they didn't choose, memories they can't trust, and names that are basically just serial numbers. 2B, 9S, A2. When your consciousness can be backed up, restored, or erased, what actually makes you who you are? Is it memory, experience, choice, or just repetition with slight variations? Even themes of hope are questioned. It doesn't present optimism as naive or despair as enlightened. It just shows how both can become traps. Blind hope leads to denial, and total nihilism can lead to paralysis. The characters are constantly swinging between these extremes, trying and usually failing to find something that lets them keep going without lying to themselves.
We were designed to be killed. They built a back door in the bunker and programmed it to activate after a certain amount of time. The commander, me, 2B, sacrificial lambs, all of us.
Despite me mentioning extremes, there's also a lot of restraint in these explorations. They rarely stop to explain its themes outright, because it understands that existential dread isn't scary because it's loud. In fact, it's the opposite. It's quiet, it's persistent, and more often than not, it usually goes unresolved. Nier Automata doesn't tell you what the meaning of life is. It asks you why you need it to mean something, and what you're willing to believe to keep moving. Number 2, God of War Ragnarok. This was a hard placement for me because there was a point where this almost took the number 1 spot, but through a number of deciding factors, this takes home the silver medal. When I first saw the trailer for the 2018 God of War, I didn't know what to think. It had been nearly 8 years since God of War 3 had come out, and when I heard that the series was moving into the Norse pantheon, I was expecting the same loud and bombastic spectacle, just with different gods and monsters. And while some of that is still there, what I ultimately ended up getting instead was the story of a man trying to make peace with who he is and trying to be better for those around him. It's a rare situation where a long bit of time away actually works in a sequel's favor. It allowed us to actually grow up alongside Kratos. 8 years is a long time. People change. A lot. I can safely say I am not the same person I was at the start of that gap of time. So I don't know how the me back then would have reacted to such a drastic gear shift. It's quieter than the previous games, it's more subdued, more restrained. Kratos isn't constantly screaming to the heavens the way he used to be. In fact, he hardly says anything at all. But he's still able to communicate so much through that restraint. How he observes the world, how he reacts to conflict, and how every word he does choose feels weighed down by a lifetime of regret.
People, they're trying to survive too.
Close your heart to it. On our journey, we will be attacked by all manner of creature. Close your heart to their desperation. Close your heart to their suffering. Do not allow yourself to feel for them. They will not feel for you.
Even if you never played the original Greek games, you still get a sense that this is a man who's lived through unimaginable violence and unimaginable loss. A huge part of that is in no small thanks to the acting.
Leave my home.
I do have a soft spot for the original, but Chris Judge gives Kratos a gravity and humanity that the character never had before, and both he and the writers managed to do it without ever erasing who he used to be. The 2018 God of War didn't feel like a legacy sequel, it felt like the natural progression of the story, it felt like the next chapter. Despite that though, it did feel like Santa Monica Studios was keeping a lot of their cards close to the chest for this game because they weren't sure how people were going to react. But after they learned that they hadn't lost their step, they locked in and gave us one of the best sequels ever made. One of the few complaints I did have about the 2018 game is that we didn't get a lot of actual gods to fight. Which I realize was intentional and also served to help with Kratos' growth, but come on, it's still God of War. I still wanted something. So what did Ragnarok give us? It opens with a battle against a crashed out Freya, Odin shows up to casually declare war, and giving us our first real boss battle with the poster child of Norse mythology.
That was for Baldur. Now show me this god killer I've heard so much about.
And that's just in the first hour. Ragnarok makes it clear that the gloves are off this time. It's not a slow burn about whether or not the war with the gods will happen, but about what's to come when it does. While I'd love to talk about all the fantastic characters and themes that this game has, this video is already going to be super long by the time I get to editing, so I want to give a quick shout out to a YouTuber named Fatbread, who does a great job talking about all the different characters in the Norse God of War games, a lot of which I used to help compile the genome for this part of the video. But I do want to talk about one particular theme that this game explores better than almost any series I've ever seen, and that is the exploration of grief. And when I say exploring grief, I don't mean grief as a single moment or a tragic backstory, because that's not really what grief is. Grief is often something that's continuous, ongoing, corrosive, and personal. Something that doesn't resolve neatly just because the plot demands it. Freya is the most immediate example. Her whole conflict with you is rooted in her grief over Baldur's death from the last game. And even after you go through a full arc with her, after apologies, cooperations, and shared goals, she never really moves past it.
And now that you have what you seek,
I suppose this is the point where I forgive you, where I kill you.
have you decided?
To be honest, I don't think I can do either. There's still a part of me that is so angry. And it'll always be. It'll always be angry. But no. You are not the one who needs to die.
She doesn't really forgive you, she just recognizes that there's a larger enemy in front of her. We see that same idea reflected in both Thor and Sif, both of which are still mourning the loss of their sons.
This is him? Here. In our home.
Listen, Modi had some problems, but he was my son. And the only reason you aren't mush right now is because of that broken piece of wood.
Their grief manifests as shame and responsibility. They quit drinking and they try to be better for their daughter. Not because they found peace, but because they're terrified of failing again.
Can't you see what's happening? He's not protecting us. Magni, Modi, our boys. We used to tell them stories by the fire. Do you remember? We would carve those wooden horses. We would play and laugh until the sun sank and they fell asleep in our laps. They were thrown at the Allfather's problems like brittle knives to a mountain face. And for what? What if Thrud's next?
It's grief filtered through guilt. The realization that love alone isn't enough if you're not willing to change.
Mom and I are here for you. Even when you're here.
And then, of course, there's Sindri.
Please, you have to save him. You have to. He can't. You can't.
Sindri's arc might be one of the most heartbreaking ones in the entire game. He starts off as this squeamish, anxious comic relief character, someone whose shyness and germophobia gets played up for laughs, but by the end he becomes a portrait of what happens when that grief gets turned into bitterness.
I'm so sorry.
No. No, I don't want to hear it. You don't know what sorry means.
We're not letting Odin get away with this.
Would that be the Odin you invited into my home?
We were all fooled.
But some of us were bigger fools than others. Aren't we? I gave you everything. My skills. My friendship. My home. My secrets. My treasures. And you just kept taking. And now what have I got? Not even my family. You want sorry? This is what sorry looks like.
What can we do?
We. There is no we. There's only you. No matter what the cost. So what you can do is get the fuck out of my sight.
Come, Atreus. Leave it be. Mourn how you wish.
I thought we were his family too.
We were.
His love isn't loud or explosive like the gods, but when it's taken from him, it breaks something fundamental inside him, and the game refuses to soften that blow or offer easy reconciliation. Some relationships don't survive loss, no matter how much history they have. What makes this all work, though, is how it reflects back onto Kratos and his grief over Faye. Faye rarely gets a mention in either of the games, but even before we physically see her in Ragnarok, she still carries such a strong presence. In the beginning of the 2018 game, she's already gone. But throughout the entirety of the game, it still feels like she's there physically with you. I mean, I guess she kind of is, but you know what I mean. And despite Ragnarok taking place years after fulfilling her wishes to have her ashes scattered in Jotunheim, you can still feel her loss. Look at how Kratos looks at the bag that once carried her ashes. Look at how he carelessly throws his own blades to the side, but he gently places the axe she gave him somewhere safe. Faye was the first person who truly believed Kratos could be more than a weapon, more than a god of war.
We are not our failures. We are not who we were. We must be better.
And the tragedy is that she never gets to see what kind of man he becomes because of that belief. Every decision he makes in Ragnarok feels haunted by the question of whether or not he's honoring her or failing her.
Is our future.
The dream sequences he has with her are especially powerful because they aren't about nostalgia or comfort. Faye doesn't appear as a gentle memory to soothe him. She appears as a reminder of expectations, of his responsibility, of the future that she believed he could build. And that's a special kind of grief. Not just mourning someone you loved, but mourning the fact that they'll never get to see the version of you that they inspired. Even though Kratos saw his death prophesied at the end of the game prior, it's not the death itself that he fears. It's the idea that no matter how much he changes, he'll still continue the cycle of violence. He fears that Atreus will inherit his failings instead of his growth. and Faye's absence sharpens that fear because she was the one person who could challenge him without judgment. What Ragnarok does beautifully is show that Kratos' grief doesn't weaken him, it disciplines him. Every time he chooses mercy, every time he steps back instead of striking first, every time he lets Atreus make his own mistakes, by the end of that game, Kratos isn't defined by losing Faye, he's defined by what he does with that loss. Which juxtaposes its previous series, which was built on revenge, on rage, it makes that transformation that much more powerful.
Son, listen closely. You feel their pain because that is who you are. And you must never sacrifice that. Never. Not for anyone. I was wrong, Atreus. I was wrong. Open your heart. Open your heart to their suffering. That is your mother's wish. And mine as well. Today, son. Today, we will be better.
God of War Ragnarok is one of the best stories ever written and one of the best stories ever played. I can only think of one game that does it better. Now before we get to number 1, here's a few honorable mentions. And my number 1 favorite game of all time is Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. It's worth noting that even though there hasn't been a substantial new entry to the series in over 10 years, Metal Gear Solid is still one of my all-time favorite game series. And standing head and shoulders above all the other games is Metal Gear Solid 3.
Snake, try to remember some of the basics of CQC.
A pattern you've probably noticed on this list is that a lot of these games mechanically aren't always the first of their kind. But they managed to take what I loved about the games that came before it and refine them to what I consider their best qualities. And I know I usually start with the story for a lot of these and then talk about the gameplay second, I'm gonna switch it up here. Snake Eater fully commits to its identity as a prequel, both in its settings and in its equipment. It gives us older technology to work with, fewer resources, less infrastructure, and instead of limiting the experience, it actually adds on a new layer that feels completely unique to this game. It reinforces the feeling that you're just a pawn in a bigger game.
There'll be no rescue if you're captured. The military and US government will deny any involvement in the affair.
You may have radio support, but on the actual mission, you're expendable. The jungle doesn't care about who you are, and neither do the governments pulling the strings above you. You're not a hero marching into glory, you're an asset being deployed and discarded in a conflict where information and espionage are a more dangerous weapon than guns and grenades. Instead of messing around in military bases and classified facilities, you're in the middle of the jungle, where there's just as many animals out to kill you as there are soldiers. And because you're in the jungle, just as there's so many ways to survive, there are also so many ways to be hurt. Anything from broken bones, burns, gashes, bullet wounds, bee stings, snake bites. And you have to treat all of them manually, otherwise your health won't recover as quickly. You're also not running around in a sexy bondage suit like you were in the other two games. You have to actively manually apply camouflage. And because you're in a Soviet jungle up in the mountains, you'll need different kinds of camouflages and disguises for different locations. And because the mission takes place over the course of a couple days, you also need to keep your energy up or your health won't regenerate fast enough. How do you recover that? Well, you can either hope that you find a spare ration in an enemy soldier's locker, or more likely you're going to have to hunt, kill, and eat animals that you find in the wild. The depth of gameplay cannot be overstated, and nowhere is it more apparent than in its boss fights. I don't want to talk about every single one of them, but I do want to talk about a few that perfectly showcase just how much care went into this game. The first one is your initial encounter with the young Revolver Ocelot. On the surface, it looks like a standard shootout, but there's a lot of fun ways you can mess with the environment to spice things up. You can shoot Ocelot's hat off to distract him, you can walk over to the edge of your side of the trench and instigate a quick draw duel with him. There's even a mid-fight cutscene showing him reloading for the first time, and it plays out in real time, so if you actually exit out of watching the cutscene, he's still reloading, so you actually have a chance to actually shoot him. You can do some other funny things like wearing the alligator hood to make his soldiers laugh, shooting a beehive down from behind him to temporarily immobilize him. The amount of thought that just went into this one boss fight is insane, and that's only the beginning. Another boss is the End, which just might be the greatest boss battle in any video game ever. It's a sniper duel stretched across multiple maps, a slow-burning test of patience, positioning, and awareness. The End's camouflage is a moss substance that's literally fused to his body, which doesn't just make him hard to spot, it also allows him to regenerate using sunlight. If you land a few shots on him, he'll stun you and relocate, forcing you to track him down all over again. He also fights non-lethally using tranquilizers, so if you black out, it isn't a game over. You just wake up in a jail cell and then you have to escape to continue the hunt. Which sounds overwhelming on paper, but because the End is also a sleepy old man, there's some goofy ways to outsmart him. In the cutscene where he first actually gets introduced, he actually gets left on the dock long enough for you to actually take him out with a sniper rifle. Doing that will let you skip the fight entirely. Another cheeky way you can actually beat him is you can actually save your game and then quit, and either push your internal clock ahead by a couple of weeks, or wait it out in real time, and he'll actually pass away of old age when you get back. In my opinion, neither of those are quite as satisfying as beating him in an actual one-on-one, but it's still a cute detail and one I appreciate.
What the hell happened?
Maybe it was from old age.
You mean he kicked the bucket in the middle of a battle?
Maybe.
Well, Snake, the victory is yours.
No, I don't think so.
What do you mean?
It was his dying wish to fight me, but I disappointed him.
The penultimate one I want to talk about, though, is the Sorrow.
Sad. So sad. A host of sorrows. And you are one of them.
The Sorrow isn't really a traditional boss battle so much as it is a spooky hallway where you have to make it past all the souls of the people you killed thus far. Metal Gear was definitely no stranger to stealth in their games, but this one really punishes you if you decide to go full Rambo. Every soldier you kill appears as a soul in the river that you have to get past. If you get hit by any of them, at best you'll just lose some health. At worst, you'll always run across the Cobra unit because they all die in cutscene, but other than them, everything else is dependent on how you've played up to that point. I do have one more that I want to talk about, but before I do, we're going to pivot to talking about the story.
After the end of World War II, the world was split into two, East and West. This marked the beginning of the era called the Cold War.
Everyone has their Roman Empire, that specific point in history that just fascinates them. I think the Cold War is definitely my Roman Empire. And if I'd have to guess, it's probably Hideo Kojima's too.
And it was only a week later that we had something much bigger on our hands.
The Cuban Missile Crisis.
It's a unique case where it's still recent enough that it's not anywhere near what's considered ancient history. But it's still a period that we didn't and still really don't know a whole lot about. And this game takes full advantage of that.
You mean the Soviets pulled out of Cuba just to get their hands on Sokolov?
That's right.
What the hell was he working on?
We're talking about a secret weapon so big that Khrushchev was ready to pull out of Cuba to get it back.
This story could not have been told as well in a modern age. The Cold War backdrop is a foundation that allows the story to interrogate themes such as loyalty, obedience, and sacrifice without ever giving a clean answer about whether or not any of it was worth it.
I could see the planet as it appeared from space. That's when it finally hit me. Space exploration is nothing but another game in the power struggle between the US and the USSR. Politics, economics, the arms race, they're all just arenas for meaningless competition. I'm sure you can see that, but the Earth itself has no boundaries. No East, no West, no Cold War. And the irony of it is, the United States and the Soviet Union are spending billions on their space programs and the missile race, only to arrive at the same conclusion. In the 21st century, everyone will be able to see that we are all just inhabitants of a little celestial body called Earth.
And when you understand that, the game stops being a goofy James Bond-inspired spy thriller meme game and becomes a story about what it means to follow orders and who pays the price when you do. And no better way is that showcased than with the boss.
What's it going to be? Loyalty to your country or loyalty to me? Your country or your old mentor? the mission or your beliefs, your duty to your unit or your personal feelings.
The boss isn't some bad guy in Snake's way. She's a decorated war hero, your mentor.
What's the story between you and the boss?
She was like a mother, and my master.
And your lover?
It went deeper than that.
Deeper?
Half of me belongs to the boss. For 10 years, we lived and died together. You couldn't possibly understand.
And you think you can kill her now?
Everything about her life is shaped by her own sense of duty. Not by personal ambitions, not by revenge, not by power, just purely by her loyalty and her obedience. The kind of obedience that demands you to erase yourself completely if that's what your country needs.
Look at this scar. This is proof that I was once a mother. I gave up my body and my child for my country. There is nothing left inside me now. Nothing at all. No hatred, not even regret. And yet sometimes at night, I can still feel the pain creeping up inside me, slithering through my body like a snake.
What makes her so devastating as a character is that she never stops believing in that duty, even when it destroys her. She accepts being branded as a traitor even if the world would never know the truth. She believed that the stability of the world mattered more than her legacy. What's worse is you don't even find out the truth about her yourself until after you've already killed her.
Listen to me. She didn't betray the United States. No. Far from it. She was a hero who died for her country. She carried out her mission knowing full well what was going to happen. Self-sacrifice. Because that was her duty.
The boss didn't fight you out of hatred. She did it because that was the role history assigned to the both of you. One must die, one must live, and the winner would go on to carry the fight.
You're a soldier. Finish your mission. Prove your loyalty. Face me.
But that isn't the worst part. I said I had one more boss battle to talk about, and I could talk about how fighting her was nothing short of the culmination of everything you learned throughout the course of the game, but the big thing I want to talk about is this part right here. You're not watching a cutscene here. This is gameplay. You can't move and you can't refuse. You have to push the button. You have to pull the trigger. You have to kill the boss. Snake doesn't kill the boss. You do. The final cutscenes may be framed to look like victories, but they don't feel like one. The game doesn't congratulate you. You didn't beat the bad guy, you just did your job. Metal Gear Solid 3 is a story about how legends are manufactured, how truth is buried, and how soldiers are asked to carry out the sins of their country so that the countries themselves don't have to. It's the kind of story that could only work in the backdrop of something like the Cold War. And you also understand that it doesn't make you feel like a hero, but it never lets you forget the cost of becoming one. Which is why for me, Metal Gear Solid 3 isn't just the best Metal Gear Solid game, or even one of the best video games ever made, but after all these years, it's still my all-time favorite game.